Welcome to a Tech Moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Kristina Etter. In this podcast, we take just a few minutes to discuss some of the exciting science and technology in the cannabis and hemp industries. And today, I'm going to admit, it might take a little more than just a few minutes because the topic that we have is just so fascinating. So, one of the things that we know about cannabis consumption is that the effects vary from person to person, product to product, consumer to consumer. And this phenomenon makes it difficult for not only for patients to continue to get consistent effects, but it can be worrisome or even burdensome for other people. You know, have you ever wondered why that friend of yours who takes 10 milligrams and gets wrecked, and yet you can take 10 milligrams and not feel anything? Or why do some people experience paranoia with cannabis and others don't? The answers to all of these mysteries lie in our DNA and our body chemistry. And how beneficial could it be to consumers everywhere if we had guidelines or a schematic that could help us along that journey? For patients, this information could be very empowering, very enlightening, and really help them down this path. For recreational consumers, knowing that there's something in their DNA that could lead to a potential pitfall down the road might be of valuable information. But regardless of how you look at it, the more data that we have, the better. So today I am so thrilled to bring onto the show Lynn May, who is the CEO and founder of EndoCanna Health. And we're going to talk about this in great detail. And to aid in this conversation, I'm actually going to bring up my own DNA report and go over some of this incredible information that's available through EndoCanna's DNA analysis. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today on a Tech Moment and to talk about the science and genetics of cannabis.
Thank you, Kristina. I'm so grateful to be on here. And you're super brave. You're actually willing to share all the different nuances that you have in your DNA with everybody. So that's pretty cool. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. But before we dive into this report, one of the things I want to kind of lay out is kind of the background of EndoCanna and what led you down this path of DNA testing for consumption. And how did you fall into this?
Yeah, so how this started for me is as a patient initially. So I started consuming cannabis because I was diagnosed with ADD when I was a kid and put on all kinds of prescription medication. And then I was lucky enough that I found cannabis to work for me. Not advocating this for teenagers in any way, but this is what worked for me. My parents really didn't want me to have anything to do with it, so they ended up kicking me out of the house in my late teens. But not only kicking me out, they actually called the cops to try to have me arrested. The irony of this whole thing is that my parents now both consume formulations that I helped develop, so it kind of comes full circle with education. But in doing so, I became an activist. So I was the president of the Cannabis Action Network, and I held rallies like in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And throughout this journey, I started seeing people that are taking cannabis to help with their own health and their own therapeutics and wellness. So it wasn't only working for me, it was working for others. And it took me a long time to try to find what works for me, but I had no idea that there's a personal experience. You're just trying to find, try this, try that. And then when I moved to LA 10, 11 years ago, I thought the best way for me to get into cannabis was in a dispensary space. So I got involved and was an owner operator of 5 different dispensaries and cultivation facility and delivery service, and which was an interesting experience because I had access to all kinds of chemovars and cultivars. But then I started seeing this pattern again where you have 2 people with the same symptomatic condition, same illness, that consume the same cannabis and have a different experience. So in my type of ADD, I have all these windows that are open in my head, but when I focus, I hyper-focus on one thing. So I became obsessed to try to find a solution for this. I thought this had to do with the plant itself. So I came across a video by a gentleman named Kevin Kernan, who's the first person or one of the first people to genetically sequence cannabis. And I started pursuing him. Long story short, I was working with Kevin and their company, and I would go around the country, US and Canada, and I would get cannabis material, bring it to my lab, extract the DNA, purify it, and send it to Boston to a sequencer. And we started one of the first cannabis libraries, cannabinoid libraries called Cannapedia. And their parent company was a pharmacogenomics company. And one of the things we did was we had a meeting with physicians from all over the world. They were treating kids with CBD mostly for epilepsy. And they were saying great results, 100 seizures going to 0 seizures, but there were some outliers. There were some kids that it wasn't working for correctly, or their seizures started coming back. And when we looked at their genomic profile, we saw that they had a common genotype, and we published on that. So it was my other light bulb moment. I was like, wait, you mean that your DNA plays a role in how you experience cannabinoids and terpenes? And that was sort of my aha moment. And when I saw that, I approached them. They really didn't want to deal with the human side. They wanted to focus on the plant. So I ended up bringing some really smart people with me, and we started researching, and it started launched EndoCanna Health in 2017. That's kind of the journey.
Fantastic. And to attest what you just said, I can speak from my own personal experience. My husband and I are both cannabis patients, and together we've eliminated 13 prescriptions between the two of us using cannabis. And there's a process, and there was differences in how different things worked with each of us that we noticed, because when we first dove into this, we started keeping a journal of everything that we were trying, writing down how it affected us, how long did it take to kick in. And what we started to discover was that there were some stark differences between the way that my husband reacted to certain products and the way that I would react to the same thing. One of the things that we'll get into later and that we'll go into in this report is the fact that I don't get anything out of edibles, but my husband, who uses them every single day, has used the same dose for the last 4 years and gets the same effect every time. So we knew that there were differences there, and that's actually what caused me to go down that journey as well and start digging into some of this and doing my own research and reading the papers and things that you talk about and the research that other people have done. And I had my own suspicions of how my body was processing things based or differently than maybe his was. But it's really fun now to get into this report and see those things actually come to life. So one of the things that I know is that our audience members are going to have a lot of questions about the science behind this. So do you want to talk a little bit about how DNA can help provide these guidelines and some of this helpful information for cannabis consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things that people say is like, there's not enough science, there's not enough research. They're right. There is not enough science, not enough research for reasons that were done purposefully, right? That's what happens with prohibition. So we have research, and there's a lot of research. There's over 15,000 articles in PubMed alone on cannabis. And the goal is to be able to align the research that's done with your own endocannabinoid profile. And that's kind of what the nucleus of EndoDNA is. So we have this amazing endocannabinoid system. And think about it this way: prior to 1992, your physician was treating you without the knowledge of this incredible puppet master. It regulates every other system within our bodies, and our doctors are treating us without any knowledge of that. The first thing, starting the building blocks, understand that we have this amazing system and we produce these endogenous endocannabinoids. So it lives inside of us. But the amounts of these endogenous endocannabinoids vary from person to person. And the metabolites and all the other things that come out, that's a whole individual thing. So 99.9% of us are identical. But that 0.1%, that's what makes all the difference in the world. So being able to look at the genes that have a direct impact or indirect impact on your endocannabinoid system, that's sort of the goal. And being able to align those with specific references that have been done. And granted, there's different types of studies. There are studies that are done in vitro, in vivo, animal, human. So, and we taper those studies, and we understand that there's ongoing studies going all the time. But to be able to align those with a genotype to provide you a suggestion on what to do to make sure that you, as you said, Kristina, really, really well, to mitigate an adverse event. The goal overall is to make sure that you avoid that adverse event. How many people ever had an experience eating an edible and they got paranoid and they went in the corner? Or how many people ever said, oh no, it just puts me to sleep right away? So when people have this adverse event, they tend not to go back. And, I had many people that said, oh no, I ate a brownie back in the day and I stay away from the devil's lettuce. I'll never consume that again. And that's because they didn't take what's right for them. So everything we should do is individual, it's personalized. And this is our goal, to be able to align a experience for individuals to avoid an adverse event. So now they can have an optimal experience and understand what they need to take cannabinoids and terpenes for and how they react with their body. So as you said, it's a blueprint and a roadmap to give you that, positive experience.
Right. And then one of the things that I really want to kind of segue from that into is, not only is this information really important for consumers, but I would assume that retailers, medical clinics, they're all going to be very interested in this as well, to help consumers avoid those adverse experiences. I mean, we know that there have been lawsuits from adverse experiences in edibles, here in Colorado. I would think that having this kind of information and helping your consumers or your patients go down this path would actually be kind of a way to protect your own interest in your business, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. This is an empowerment tool. If you look at it all the way around, this gives the power to the individual. The individual can, since we're HIPAA compliant, you can share that information with your healthcare professional, or you can actually get enough of this information to go in to a dispensary and make an educated decision all the way from your DNA to individual products or endo line. So all the way through the gamut, we are bookending the experience. But you're absolutely right in terms of avoiding and mitigating these adverse events. Especially some people consume prescription medication, and certain cannabinoids can actually interact with prescription medication. So having a conversation with your healthcare professional before you consume cannabis, that's probably helpful. And a lot of healthcare professionals don't know that the prescription medication interacts with cannabinoids. When you go to a physician and they're prescribing you medication, or a pharmacist, they look at that list. What are you consuming? But they don't look at cannabinoids. So that's an empowering tool as well. And then dosing. And as you said, Kristina, dosing is extremely important. And dosing is based on metabolic function. So we metabolize things differently. Your husband may be a poor metabolizer. You may be an ultra rapid metabolizer. So not only do you have this conversion of 11-oxy hydroxide in your liver, that there's certain metabolites that are working to make that conversion, but also if you're a poor metabolizer, well, guess what? You're going to have a slower onset, much more powerful onset, and that creates an experience too. And then you're talking about not only the level of cannabinoids, but also the terpenes, the essential oils of this plant, how they interact together. That makes a difference for an experience as well. So having all these different variables and being able to give you that and empower you to make a more informed decision, that's sort of, that's our mission. That's what we're working on.
Perfect. So one of the things I was just so impressed with, the information that's included in this report and how many different areas it really kind of digs into. Now, I'm going to pull up the report here in just a second, but as a former bud tender, I worked in Denver in the dispensaries, and I've been a longtime consumer, similar to you. In my teenage years, I tried it for, when I was a kid, and I've kind of been a consumer off and on my entire life. But while I've suspected certain things and doing my own research and reading things and learning through what my husband and I have gone through over the last several years, the information that I was able to pull from this report just absolutely blew my mind in terms of what I already knew or already suspected. This kind of helped me confirm what I had thought and kind of look at those things. So I'm really anxious to pull this up and have a discussion here and tell people really what they're going to look for.
That's great. Yeah, we're in the business of blowing minds. That's exactly what we want to do. We are like, it's so interesting because some people are always challenging. It's the science. So being transparent was one of our hallmarks. We needed to make sure that all the information is there and available to everybody, from we call it the Bob from Iowa summary. From the summary, somebody who doesn't really care about, the details of science, or said, I'll go to the science later, to somebody that really wants to dig into the science. So you have both of those available to you. And you also mentioned, healthcare professionals. So we had some interesting stories from healthcare professionals, pain management specialists, that started using our kits to be able to let people know that they have a predisposition to opioid dependence. And when they show people that up front and say, we suggest cannabinoids instead, and we had tremendous results in terms of pain management, on par with any opioid without all the side effects. And they've actually shifted a lot of people that were asked for opioids to cannabinoids instead, knowing up front that these people have a predisposition to that. And it's really important, especially, with the opioid epidemic as well.
Oh, absolutely. And to dovetail onto that thought, at one point in time in the Midwest, my husband's pain clinic, he has degenerative disc disease. But at one point in time, they had him taking 4 hydrocodone, 4 Percocet, and 2 fentanyl patches a day. So I know the opioid epidemic is near and dear to my heart. I know how much that affects people, and cannabis really helped us change our lives and change his life for the better once we were able to get out of Midwest, come to Colorado, and really explore our options. So it was definitely fascinating for me. Now I'm going to share my screen here, and I think the first thing that comes up, tell me if this is what you're seeing. You're seeing the main homepage?
Yep, that's the main homepage.
Fantastic. Do you want to tell our audience then a little bit about what's on this screen and what they can expect to see here?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're looking at right now is the home screen, which gives you a little bit of history of cannabis. We like to kind of educate that, cannabis has been used for therapeutics for thousands of years. There's a couple other things on here that are important to know. On the left-hand side, you have all of your reports. We have 12 different categories. There are symptomatic conditions, and there are 60 reports. So each one of them will have an individual report, and the overview gives you a sense of, and we'll go into that, of where your genotypes at risk are on each one of the categories. The other thing is drug interaction report. So which is really important. This shows you different medications that are actually who have published research and data where cannabinoids can have an interaction with. Some of them are accelerants, some of them are depressants. So an example would be if people take an SSRI, so a serotonin inhibitor, an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. CBD can actually interact with those cannabinoids and suppress or increase the activity of those. So you have to understand that if you're taking those, it doesn't mean you can't take cannabinoids. It just means don't take them at the same time. Stagger. How much do you stagger? Well, it depends on what type of metabolizer you are. So an ultra-rapid metabolizer will only need to stagger or wait as long as somebody's a poor metabolizer. That's really important to know. And in the center, there is a personalized wellness plan survey. What this does is DNA is your genetic predispositions. So we're born with these genetic predispositions. However, those predispositions can be turned on and off, just as switches, based on what's called epigenetics. So this has to do with lifestyle, nutrition, your mental state, and different genes lean more towards sort of like, nature versus nurture. So different genes are, that's nature, your hair color, your eye color. Some of them are, you have a predisposition towards alcohol dependence. They say alcoholic gene, which exists. So you're predisposed to that, but what you do in your lifestyle will help turn that on and off. So the survey allows us to be able to go in and give you a personalized wellness plan based on what you're experiencing right now in the moment. So you can have a predisposition towards insomnia, but you may say, hey, I sleep great. I don't have any issues with that, but my issue is more, anxiety and inflammation. So we'll provide you that information first. We'll still show you that you have that predisposition that you may not want to turn on because it hasn't been. So it's really important to get really personalized when you answer the survey. And and the rest is just some news information. But if you want to kind of go over and start, I would suggest that we start with the overview, and that kind of gives you the full kind of view of everything.
And here we go. This is my dad's view. He's Bob from Iowa. So I love that you use that terminology.
Is that so ironic?
It's perfect. I absolutely love it. It made me giggle when you said it the first time, and I just love it. So, and I'll tell you, I loved this view when I was going through it, because you're right. It's basic, it's simple, and it's very quick and easy to see those areas that you might want to pay a little more attention to.
It's absolutely, as you said, what we want to do is we want to show people in a really quick snapshot where they have an increased risk, if they have a moderate risk, or they have a decreased risk. So we have it broken down into those categories, and those categories are associated with symptomatic conditions. We want to be extremely careful not to make any claims. We're not FDA approved. We're not treating diseases or anything like that. However, there are symptomatic conditions that you, as an individual or working with a healthcare professional, you can kind of equate that to a, what you're going through, a disease state that you're experiencing right now. So there's symptomatic conditions, and the symptomatic conditions are associated with what people also consume cannabis for. So this shows you if you have a moderate risk, it's in yellow. If you have a decreased risk, it's green. And if you have an increased risk, it's red. And each one of these has its own individual report. So you can scroll down the different categories. We have anxiety, which has, fear extension, etc. You have some digestive reports. You have drug dependence as well, cognitive function. Then you have the metabolism report with CBD and THC, which we sort of talked about. Some fun things like muscle soreness. I'm curious, why are my muscles more sore when I work out than, the friend I'm working out with? So there's some genetic predispositions towards that as well. As I was mentioning, alcohol metabolism, and this is all a big puzzle. Think of it as like a huge puzzle, and you have to kind of put the piece of the puzzle together to build a story. You know your own story. So if I'm going through that, I'm trying to grab bits and pieces of that and say, is that correct? Like it's a fortune teller, but it's a fortune teller that actually has real scientific information. It's just kind of putting those pieces together. So as you see, there are some elevated risk elements which are interesting that we can go through, which are mood reports. And this is an interesting example. So I have a friend of mine who was going through a pretty serious divorce, and he was saying to me, I read and I know you talk about cannabis is what I need to consume. It'll make me feel better. And he calls me 3 days in, and he's like, oh man, I'm so depressed. I can't get out of bed. I was like, okay. When I looked at his, his report, he's got a predisposition towards depressive feelings. And when you're consuming something that is higher in what we communicate as indica dominant, maybe as people can connect to that a little bit better, but it has a certain cannabinoid and terpene profile that is parallel to what you would assume an indica dominant hybrid would be. So the first question, I was like, what are you consuming? And he's like, I don't know. I was like, get the packaging. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so a lot of myrcene, a lot of linalool, a lot of terpene profiles that are associated with that sedative feeling, high THC. So what it did was it triggered his depressive feelings. So of course he's not able to get out of bed, and it's making him feel worse because that's the trigger or the expression of that gene. So when we kind of shifted to a much more balanced with limonene, and some of them that give you sort of a lift, he had a completely different experience. And that's sort of, a good example of how you would use this.
Right. So in that case, let's actually pull this one up because I do want the audience to see what is included in that report and what kind of information people can pull from this. Because again, I thought this was fascinating. One of the things that I've just kind of deduced for myself over the several years now, and I should step back here. So the prescription drugs that I used to take were SSRIs and anti-anxiety medications. And I don't take them anymore. But one of the things that I have learned in the 4 years that I've been doing this work and consuming cannabis from a medical perspective, I have learned that it's those citrusy strains, those things that smell lemony, or the tangerine strains, things that have that really pungent citrus odor to them, are the ones that are very uplifting and energetic and creative for me. And so I was really interested to see this profile in particular and have it mention that limonene terpene.
Yeah, I mean, the nose knows. This is the whole thing. I mean, we know it's really, this plant is so fascinating. I mean, you have like 500 different components working all at the same time with all the different genetics and all the different things that we have in our bodies. So to be able to have like a blanket statement, it's cannabis for everyone, it's not. It's an individual experience. And you're absolutely right on. It's, if you actually smell and understand what is, when you're smelling it, you understand that there's a fruitier kind of citrusy type of smell. That's going to give you a lift because it's associated with those sativa dominant hybrid cultivars. And just in general, how brilliant is this plant? Like every single plant in nature produces terpenes. So that's what gives the plants its smell. But this plant, where it originated from, these different, I guess, families of these plants, as indicas and these sativas, they're native to certain regions within our country, within our world. And then, these indica dominant hybrids, they came originally from Southeast Asia. They had a 4-season climate. And these plants actually produced, under stress, they release these terpenes. And these terpenes are to deter the local predators from that region to attack the plant. And when you smell them, the original, we'll call them landrace, because we don't know. Who knows if we got the original seeds from Mongolia from 10,000 years ago? But those have this musky, skunky kind of diesely smell. And if you look at them, they're prevalent in myrcene. But when you individualize terpenes, they don't work the same way as when you blend them together with the cannabinoids. They have a specific effect. And the other family of plants that were originally cultivated in more of a humid, sunny climate, like the Durbans in South Africa, or like the Mauis in the Caribbean, Hawaii, obviously. As you said, Kristina, they have a different smell. They have a little bit of a citrusy, fruitier smell. They stretch the sun. And when you're able to combine them, you understand that they give you a little bit of a lift. So they boost serotonin production. And combining them together, that's when you're able to get that sort of experience. So yeah, anyway, you're absolutely right on. And the report is actually telling you that kind of stuff. So we have this gauge. This gauge is on red. And the reason why it's on red, because you have multiple genotypes that are associated with the increased risk of depressive feelings. Not just one. If you have one, maybe it would be moderate, but there's multiple ones. And the first half of this gives you a summary of the findings. So it tells you what the summary is, what the suggested formulation is, and we'll click on that in a minute, and then your personalized wellness plan and product matching, etc. But what I want to focus on is what we're looking at. So being completely transparent, we're showing you that on mood and depressive feelings, there's two specific genes that we're looking at, which are CNR1 and CNR2, which are they work directly with your endocannabinoid system. So these are CNR1, CNR2, they call them single nucleotide polymorphisms, which are SNPs. So we have these genes, and we have millions of different genes. They're part of your 23 different chromosomes. And we give you the gene, we tell you exactly where the location of that gene is, which is your RSAD, and then we get to the genotype. And the genotype is really what makes you you. That's the key to this whole thing. So your DNA communicates in these 4 letters. So computers speak in binary code 1s and 0s, and your DNA speaks in a C, a T, an A, and a G. So the combination of those letters are what makes you you, and you inherit them from your parents. So when you inherit the same exact one, it's called homozygous. When you inherit 2 different ones, like here's a T and a C, it's called heterozygous. So this is your genotype. And what this means is that you have a predisposition to experiencing more depressive feelings than the average population. And then you're going to ask yourself, what is the average population? Good question. So you can actually click the button that says compare populations on each of the reports. And what it does, it shows you how prevalent, how common is this genotype in different populations. So is it common in East Asian populations versus South Asian populations versus African populations versus general population? So you can see that some people walk, a much more common than other people having this genetic predisposition.
Fascinating. And one of the things I do want to point out on the screen that I really enjoyed as well is the fact that with each of these individual markers that you bring up, you actually link the study that has the information. So for people that really do want to take that deeper dive and look into the things or what their DNA means, you provide those links to be able to go out and take a look at the actual research. It's fascinating for me to go through all of this and to see those different things here.
Yeah, absolutely, Kristina. The research is key, and that's sort of, and the way that we build our system, we use deep learning, artificial intelligence, and we have an incredible science board. So everything we do has to have a peer-reviewed study reference associated with it. The other thing is, we always look for new studies. We're involved in studies, and there's many studies going around the world. So as a study is published, we use AI to be able to get that study, make a determination of whether it fits based on our criteria, and then we use our science board, which is made up of Dr. Ethan Russo, Dr. Chris Spooner, Dr. Mike Tagan, and then me, and then we make a determination whether that study is going to be included. So if there's a study of 10 Asian men from 35 to 40, it's probably going to get thrown out. We throw out a lot of studies, they're not relevant, and then you always have updates, lifetime updates to your report. So you're always going to get fresh content as it becomes available, as new research is being published. So that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. So, and then one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, because this is actually something I've joked about since I was a kid. I've always joked that I don't have the gene for addiction. And so I was really, blown away by was coming into these different reports where you actually do look at genetic anomalies that could predispose someone to addiction. And for me, it was fascinating because they all came back low. And so it was very, like I said, it was empowering for me to understand, even though I've joked in the past, that there's actually a little bit of truth to that.
There's a lot of truth to that. We have genetic predispositions, and like, as you said, for some people, this validates what you already thought. For some people, we're not trying to give you something that you don't know. It answers the question why. For me, that's the most important thing. It's my mom always talked about stress is the cause of all diseases. So if you want to go back, I want to actually show you how I get the why. If you want to go back to the homepage and go on to, I think you have a moderate risk in the summary. I saw some anxiety markers. So if you want to click on that really quick, like stress reactivity or fear extent, whatever one, just pick one, because I want to explain that for a second. So yeah, so all my life, my mom was always saying, watch your stress, watch your stress. It's the cause of many diseases. True, but I'm like, well, why? How does it work? I really want to deep down understand. And this is a really, really interesting example of how your endocannabinoid system is related to the expression of certain genes and how we can have this different experience. And this is the reason why people actually get paranoid too from consuming cannabis. So you have this gene called FA. If you want to scroll down, just so everybody can see on the screen, this gene produces an enzyme that actually degrades and breaks down anandamide. So as we know, anandamide is an endogenous endocannabinoid, and this endogenous endocannabinoid, we call it, anon means bliss, so we call it our bliss hormone.
Right.
What happens in our bodies with stress is, if somebody cuts us off in traffic, we have a stressful event. So all these things are starting to be released, all these different chemicals. We have dopamine, there's some adrenaline, there's some norepinephrine, there's cortisol that's released into our bloodstream. Our body's in a heightened state. Fight or flight is triggered. Then you realize you're not in the jungle, the lion isn't chasing you, you're fine. Your body then says, okay, I'm going to release anandamide, among other things, to be able to bring us back to homeostasis, bring us back to balance. Well, guess what? Some people with a certain genotype produce less anandamide than the average population. And this is the genotype that is like that homozygous CC genotype in Fa. So Fa, that comes out of your amygdala part of the brain. So when you experience that stress, and if you have less anandamide, well, what actually mimics the way anandamide works within our bodies? It's THC. So being able to consume some THC to bind to that CB1 receptor and sort of fill that gap of what you're actually not producing, that deficiency, now you're going to be able to deal with stress much better. But there is a caveat to that. If you consume a little bit more THC than you need, then what happens is that fight or flight gets triggered, and it gets triggered and you have that paranoid experience. But without you understanding this, the level of stress that you're going to experience, your body, with all this cortisol it's pumping into your bloodstream, it actually elevates your pH level. You become more acidic. Then your body does what it's supposed to do, is it attacks it with an overactive immune response. So usually it's inflammation. It's in your joints. It's in your ankle. It's in your wrists. It's in your hands. You get this inflammation. We walk around inflamed. And then, by the way, about half the population has this genetic predisposition. So I'm knowing that it's pretty common. So I'm never surprised if people say, hey man, cannabis makes me paranoid. Yeah, well, you're triggering that genetic expression. So as you do that over time, without still addressing that, it starts moving into your gut health. And people, because we're acidic, and people experience IBS and other kind of symptoms. So empowering yourself up front to understand that there's a different way to consume cannabis, less THC, more CBD, so it can address the inflammation that's being provoked, and the terpene profile. This is really important. So combining all that together, you have your roadmap to help mitigate an experience that may cause you not to want to consume cannabis in the future.
Right. And, I hear that a lot, and especially in the public circles, when you're talking to cannabis advocates, you hear a lot of times that, oh, there's no side effects. It's totally safe. It's harmless. It's this, it's that. I can tell you from firsthand experience, I was in an uncomfortable situation to begin with, and I consumed too much THC, thinking that because I had used cannabis most of my life, that I have this great tolerance and everything's good. But in this particular instance, it literally sent me into a 4-hour panic attack where I was convinced that every bad thing my mother had ever said was going to happen to me was going to happen that night. And I've been there. And so now I have a little more empathy, and I understand a little bit better that there are these triggers. There are certain circumstances that can cause people to have very, very bad experiences. And I mean, I spent 4 hours wondering whether or not I was going to wake up missing a kidney in a tub of ice, or whether I was going to be chained to Jabba the Hutt somewhere in Afghanistan. It was very, very terrifying, and it was a horrible experience. And it's one that I use as a learning experience for a lot of the people that I talk to and other consumers, because I lived it. I know that that the possibility is there. And when I see these results and know that it was part of my genetic predisposition and the combination of way too much THC that put me into that position, now I am much more careful and much more aware of what it is that I'm consuming. I'm much more cautious when you're in those social situations and somebody says, here, try this. I'm like, wait a minute. let's talk about this first, because I know. And so having something like this, I think, would be incredibly beneficial for people.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. It's exactly it. That's the experience, and the experience is individual too, because if you saw that one genotype had an association with PTSD, and the PTSD is associated with trauma, childhood trauma. Right. So usually, it doesn't mean it's for everybody, but if you had experienced some trauma in the past, this genotype is more probably, people with this genotype have that predisposition to express that feeling of anxiety if they had that stressful event. If you have this genotype, but you didn't actually have a stressful event, what happens in PTSD, there's something called chandelier cells in our brains that actually choke off neurotransmission. And when that happens is we sort of replay, especially under that heightened stress, we replay the movie in our heads over and over and over. But if you didn't have the movie to replay, you weren't abused or you weren't in the Gulf War or anything like that, then it's not affecting you in the same way. But if you have that movie, because that's when it becomes that individual experience, now you're getting that replaying over and over and over. So it's just a great tool to be able to empower yourself. You're absolutely right on correct. That's a great example.
So now let's talk about one other thing here too that I want to dive into before we end this podcast. We talked about this earlier on about the differences between what one person might feel at a 10 milligram edible versus what another might feel with a 10 milligram edible. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but FA, the gene FA actually plays a part in that. And then there's also the CYP genes that are a part of this, correct? Can we go through that a little bit?
It's this whole thing with edibles, it's one of the first things, like, when I speak, I always ask the question, how many people had a bad experience with an edible? Probably 50% of the people raise their hand. The one thing people don't understand, that your liver converts THC to a different substance called 11-oxyhydroxide tetrahydrocannabinol, which is more powerful. There's a gene called CYP2C9 that actually produces the enzyme, the metabolite that breaks down THC. And that genotype on CYP2C9, there's a family of genes called cytochrome P450 markers. And the study is called pharmacokinetics. So it has to do with the way we metabolize different things, food, alcohol, drugs, etc. And CYP2C9 is specific to THC. So not only is your liver converting it, but it depends what type of metabolite you are. So think of this as a perfect storm. FA will play a role in this, and there's also AKT1 and CNR1, all the different genes that have an association with a mental state. So if you see that you are a poor metabolizer or a moderate metabolizer of THC, what will happen is if you take too much, if you and I already know because you use this as an example, maybe your husband and you. So if you and your husband, you are a rapid metabolizer. So for you, maybe 100, 200, 300 milligrams is the dose that you will start feeling that. For him, it may be 10 to 20 milligrams. If you guys both take a heightened amount of THC as an edible, you both are having a conversion. His onset may be slower and longer, but here's where it gets interesting. It's a domino effect. Let's say that because he's having this experience that's more intense, also he has a predisposition towards psychosis-like effects. That's AKT1. So what it did, it just triggered that as well. So not only is he having this long experience and a heightened state of, I may go to the hospital. I get calls from people all the time saying, oh my God, I took an edible, I'm going to die. Well, the first thing is you're not going to die. But what happened is now that you're experiencing this, it actually triggered other genetic expressions. So that psychosis-like effect, that anxiety, all these different things. So it's a perfect storm. I actually was talking to a reporter not too long ago, and I was going through, reading the tea leaves like I'm doing now, and she said, oh my God, this is proof. I need this because I get together with my group, and we all take, a 10 or 20 milligram chocolate. We all take the same amount. And they always make fun of me that I have to leave, and I don't understand why. Now it shows you why. Not only is she had the trifecta, she had the poor metabolizer, she had the trigger of psychosis-like effect, and also there's a gene called COMT, which they call the warrior gene. So if all those three get triggered, now you're also in a heightened state, and you're having that worry, that paranoia, all those things, and some people begin to hallucinate. And so these are all the things that kind of have this perfect storm, I guess. And so yeah, that's kind of how that works.
Right. Now, if we look on the screen again, I did pull up the CBD dosing site or page because I just think that this is something too that that the audience would be interested to know is that it's not just THC and how your body metabolizes THC, but CBD also has genetic markers that can affect how you metabolize that. And I was really interested to see here that I metabolize CBD a little bit differently as well.
Yeah, and there's, once again, it's a different family, so it's all P450 enzymes, but there's a different metabolite that is associated with CBD metabolism. So if you look at CYP2C19, that one specifically is that's how you metabolize CBD. So some people may not need as much. This is perfect for dosing as well. And as we get more honed in to what people should take, because there's a lot of wasted CBD. People consume hundreds of milligrams because they're like, I don't even know if it's working for me. Well, and that's the whole thing. If you don't know whether it's working for you, we have to be able to see if it's really working for you. And that's something that we can talk about in the future of what we're going to be working on to show people that it is really working on the enzymatic level, on the cellular level. And we can do that right now. But less is more. Start off less. And if you have a predisposition that you're a poor metabolizer, you don't have to consume as much. Now, if you're an ultra rapid metabolizer, you should be consuming more. But some people actually consume a lot more, and they're creating really expensive urine because your body is not going to do anything with it. It's just going to go first pass, and you're going to expel it. So understanding that is extremely important. And with CBD, I'm going to reiterate that because I've seen so many negative experiences, the drug-to-drug interaction. People think it's super safe, and it's very safe, but if you're taking prescription medication, that's something to be aware of as well.
Most definitely. So finally, what I'm going to do here is just click on this personalized wellness plan, because this really does kind of give you an overview of those areas that you might be interested in focusing on. And so just talk a little bit about, these different things here and what people can expect from this part of the report.
So the personalized wellness plan, what it does, it's an aggregator. It takes all the different symptomatic conditions and highlights a relevant report where you have an increased risk just in that symptomatic condition. So with this information, you have enough data to be able to take this and take it to a dispensary or wherever, or a medical professional, depending on state, province, or country, and say, what formulations do you have that are one-to-one with beta-caryophyllene and myrcene as the dominant terpene profiles. So you can do that as well. And by the way, we have references for all the terpenes and how they work as well when you click into about the ingredients. So this gives you an indication of what you want to consume if you're experiencing certain things. So if unwind, you don't have a predisposition to insomnia, but you have bruxism. Bruxism is grinding your teeth. So for bruxism, the formulation suggestion is more of a one-to-one to a little bit higher THC, depending on your experience with THC, and it has myrcene and linalool as a primary and secondary terpene profile. Now, this is I kind of use the analogy of NyQuil and DayQuil. This is maybe your nighttime formulation. You may not want to consume your NyQuil when you need to focus or you need to make a presentation or wherever you are. You have a different formulation that's your DayQuil formulation, depending on what you're doing during that time of day. So this empowers you what you know, when to take, when you're experiencing certain things. And we actually took that a step further. Not only are we giving you the formulation suggestion, we also use our matching algorithm to be able to match products based on their certificates of analysis that are geofenced in your area to find which products closely match our suggestion. So any one of these reports, if you click on the order now, and I want to preface that we do not sell products on our site at all. We're just a facilitator with different brands. So the way that it works is brands provide us with certificates of analysis, and then we're able to match that certificate of analysis to the actual product and see how closely the match is. And in order to be completely transparent, for instance, these specific formulations, we also have patents pending on 14 different formulations. So 7 of them are 0.3% THC and above. 7.3% or below. So these specific formulations with Mucosal, they are using our formulation recipe. They made these formulations, so they have the closest match because they use not only the cannabinoid terpene profiles, but also some of the essential oils that are complementary. Some of these other products, all we do is look at a certificate of analysis from a third-party lab, and we use our algorithm to match that percentage. We have tinctures, we have edibles, we have sublinguals, we have flour and concentrates. Some of them are a 20% match or a 30% match. But guess what? For certain people that don't know anything, I know a lot of people that walk into a dispensary and they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to get. So it's better to have a 20, 30% match. At least it gets you into the neighborhood than not knowing anything at all. And we feel it's extremely important to be able to go from the science all the way down to the product. Because, hey, maybe Bob from Iowa, he cares less about the science. He's like, just tell me what I need. Tell me the product I need to take. So that's kind of where we're going with this.
Absolutely. And this does just provide so much valuable information. You know, I really want to encourage people to take this deep dive into this information for you, for your clients, for your consumers. We talked, I'm actually going to order one of these kits for my husband because I'm very interested to see, the things that we, the differences that we notice. I want to be able to put this data behind it and really kind of hone in on what it is that he needs. And, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and going through this report. Yeah. And just kind of bringing to light some of this information. We all hear the stories, but I think to actually see the report, see the data that's provided, I think people will help connect those dots and understand that how we're made, how we're wired, makes a complete difference in how this all works.
I really appreciate this platform. I want to communicate this as much as possible because people really don't understand. I had so many people saying, well, DNA, I don't really understand it. So being able to guide people in the experience, but I want to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the future. This is something that we're going to be doing in the future. So there's a couple of things. We're going to be, we're creating a lot more different reports. We have one that's coming out that we're going to give to people on your immune system, especially with what's going on with COVID. We want to make sure that people understand that people have different predispositions towards their immune systems. So giving that away for people just to say, I'm predisposed more than others to influenza or, with research or SARS or other things, to just understand that and guide them into the experience. But here's really kind of the future of where we're going. I talked about enzymatic expression. Does it really work? So one of the ways to, when you take the survey, we have a baseline. So we understand what your baseline scale is. So if there's a pain scale or if there's a mood scale, some people are like, I'm at a 10 right now. And you can take your product, whatever product you purchased, and you can say that maybe you're at a 5 right now. So we know from a survey going back that this product is working for you. But there's something more. One of the things that we're going to be able to offer is more of an epigenetic test. So being able to say that we swabbed you at first, we understand that you took our suggestion and you've taken formula XYZ. How about going back and seeing what's been expressed on the enzymatic level? There's different ways to do that. You can measure RNA, messenger RNA. You can measure a couple of different things, but we're going to be able to show you in the near future a complete feedback loop from your suggestion to is it really working in your body, and then be able to provide that in a dashboard for people with other markers to show you this is my health and wellness dashboard. And the reason why we want to do this, the major reason is we want people to feel empowered. Through this whole pandemic, myself, I don't know about you, but I realized that our healthcare system, they try, but they failed. And it's not even their fault. It's because of the way it's set up. So for this, we want to empower people, give them back all the information they can so they can start working on their preventative health. And maybe that'll take the pressure off our healthcare system because everybody understands that we're all different and we need to do different things for our own bodies. And being able to know what's working for me definitively will allow us to empower us to take a better control over our own individual health. That's our goal.
Perfect. I cannot thank you enough, Lynn, for joining me here today and going through this and just seeing what EndoCanna is doing. I really feel like this is truly the future of our healthcare. I think as endocannabinoid science really starts to grab a hold and we start to understand things more, I do believe that this is the future of how we will hold ourselves accountable for our own health and have this information at our fingertips. So it's certainly going to be enjoyable and fun to watch all of this kind of blossom over the next several years. And again, thank you so much for everything that you're doing there at EndoCanna.
Thank you, Kristina. Appreciate the platform. It's amazing. I love what you're doing. And let's keep spreading the message. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.